Nah. Welcome to Revenge with Luna. My name is Serena Caldwell. I'm 32 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I watched my brother stand in my kitchen, in the apartment I paid for in the city I built my life in, and tell me that I owed him half of everything I would ever make for the rest of my life. Not as a joke, not as some kind of test. He meant every word. I need to back up, because if I just start from that moment, you won't understand how long this had been coming. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, middle of nowhere, middle of everything that was wrong with my family. My parents divorced when I was 9, and after that it was just my mother, my brother Derek, and me crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like cigarettes and something fried. My mother worked double shifts at a grocery store most of my childhood. She was exhausted, and she was absent, and I don't hold that against her. What I do hold against her is what she taught Derek. She taught him that I was responsible for him, not in the way older siblings look out for younger ones. I'm 18 months older than Derek, so it was never really about age. It was something else. Something she decided early on and never questioned. Serena is the responsible one. Serena will figure it out. Serena doesn't need help, she just handles things. And Derek needs to be taken care of. By the time I was 14, I was tutoring kids in my neighborhood for cash to buy my own school supplies. By 16, I had a part-time job at a drugstore. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for my first semester of community college, applied for every scholarship I could find, and mapped out exactly how I was going to get myself out of Dayton. Derek, at 16, had never done a load of laundry in his life. My mother still made his lunch. I don't say this to be cruel. I say it because it matters. I transferred to Ohio State after 2 years, finished my degree in computer science, stayed an extra year for a master's, did 2 internships, one of them unpaid, which meant I lived on rice and frozen vegetables for 4 months straight and never told anyone because I didn't want to hear that I should just come home. I did not come home. I accepted a position in Seattle at a mid-sized tech company, and I drove there with everything I owned in the back of a used Honda Civic that barely made it past Indiana. For 6 years, I built something. Quietly, steadily, the way you do when no one is watching and no one is cheering, and you've learned not to need either of those things. I got promoted twice. I changed companies once for a significant raise. I got good at what I did. Really good. And last spring, I was recruited for a senior engineering role at a firm that does infrastructure software for logistics companies. The kind of role that comes with stock options and a relocation package and a base salary of $740,000 a year. I told no one in my family. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. The first time I mentioned the bonus, just mentioned it, in passing, on a holiday call, my mother immediately brought up Derek's car insurance, which he hadn't paid in 3 months. The second time I let anything about money slip, Derek asked if he could borrow $2,000 for a business idea he was starting. I said yes. I never saw a dollar of it again, and he never mentioned it again either. Like, it had simply evaporated between us, and we'd both agreed not to look at the empty space where it used to be. So this time, I said nothing. I signed the offer letter on a Tuesday morning, sat alone in my apartment with a cup of coffee, and let myself feel it, just for a minute. Just the quiet, private satisfaction of knowing how far I had come and how hard I had worked, and how absolutely none of it had been handed to me. Then I put the letter away and went back to work. The problem was my cousin Vicky. Vicky means well in the way that people who create problems always mean well. She saw something on LinkedIn, a congratulatory post from a colleague that mentioned my new role without specifying numbers, but mentioned the company by name. It wasn't hard to look up the salary range from there. And Vicky, who has never once in her life considered whether information should be shared before sharing it, called my mother. My mother called Derek. Derek called me. I remember exactly where I was when my phone rang. I was standing in the produce section of a Whole Foods on a Wednesday evening, trying to decide between 2 bunches of asparagus like a person who has earned the right to have opinions about asparagus. I saw his name on the screen and I felt something tighten in my chest, the old automatic reflex, the one that says, "Brace yourself." I answered anyway. He didn't say congratulations. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not a single second of, "Hey, that's incredible. You did it. I'm proud of you." Nothing like that. He went straight to it, like we were already in the middle of a conversation I hadn't been invited to. He said, "Mom and I have been talking. We think it's time we come up with a real plan." I said, A plan for what? He said. For the family. For how we move forward now that you're in a position to really help. I stood very still in that grocery store. Someone reached past me for a bag of oranges and I didn't move. I'm listening, I said. He laid it out like he'd rehearsed it, which he probably had. 40% of my take-home pay would go into a family account, joint access, managed by him. Another 15% would go directly to my mother every month. He had already calculated what that would look like after taxes. He had a number ready. He mentioned it like it was settled, like we were just working out logistics. I said, "And what do I live on?" He said. "You'd still have plenty, Serena. You're making more than any of us ever dreamed. The least you can do is share it." The least I could do. I thought about the $2,000 he never paid back. I thought about the semester I ate rice and vegetables. I thought about my mother calling me every other month with some version of Derek needs. Derek is struggling. Derek just needs a little help to get on his feet. Derek had been getting on his feet for 30 years and had never once managed to stand up all the way. I said, "I need to think about it." He said, "Don't take too long. Mom's already counting on this." I hung up and stood there in the produce section for a long moment. Then I put the asparagus back, and I walked out of the store empty-handed, and I sat in my car in the parking garage and I made a decision. Not the decision they wanted. The other one. I did not call Derek back that night. I did not call my mother. I went home and I opened my laptop and I started making a different kind of list. Not a list of what I owed them. A list of what I had already given. It took me 2 hours. I had records going back 4 years. Venmo transfers, bank statements, a trail of quiet, invisible giving that I had never once been thanked for in any lasting way. $1,200 for Derek's car insurance after he got dropped from the policy. $800 for my mother's dental work. $600 for Derek's first month of rent at an apartment he left 3 months later. A plane ticket home for Christmas one year that I bought for both of them because they said they couldn't afford to come. A laptop for my mother when hers broke. Groceries sent through an app during the early pandemic months when my mother said she was scared to go out. $47,000 over 4 years. Not borrowed, given. Not once had either of them said, "We'll pay you back." Not once had I asked them to. Because that's what you do for family, I had told myself. That's what love looks like when you're the one who made it out. You reach back. But there's a difference between reaching back and being grabbed by the ankle. I called a financial advisor that week, someone I'd been meaning to see anyway. I explained the situation without using my family's names. She looked at the numbers I had given over the years, and she looked at what they were now asking for, and she didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, "You need to decide what role you want to play in their lives. Because right now you're their infrastructure, and if you don't change that, it will only expand." Infrastructure. I thought about that word for days. The call came on a Thursday morning, earlier than I expected. My mother this time. I had been anticipating Derek as the opener, but she went first, which told me they had decided she was the more sympathetic approach. Her voice was soft in a way that was practiced. She said she just wanted to talk. She said she had been thinking about how hard my life had been, how much I'd sacrificed, how proud she was. And then, after about 4 minutes of that, she said she just hoped I understood that family meant taking care of each other and that she and Derek had been doing without for a long time, and now that things had changed for me, she hoped I could see my way to doing the right thing. I said, "What's the right thing, Mom?" She said, "Derek explained the plan. We think it's fair." I asked her if she thought it was fair that I had given $47,000 over the last 4 years, and neither of them had ever once asked whether I was okay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know it was that much." I said, "I know." She said, "But this is different. This is a real plan. Derek says." I said, "I know what Derek says." Another pause. And then her voice shifted, just slightly. Lost the softness. She said, "Serena, I hope you're not going to be selfish about this, after everything we've been through as a family." There it was. I said, "I'll be in touch, Mom." And I ended the call. That afternoon I moved my direct deposit to a new account at a different bank, one that had no connection to any card or transfer they'd ever had access to. I was not angry when I did it. I was something quieter than anger. I was finished. The first sign that things had started to unravel came about 3 weeks later. Derek texted me on a Sunday. Short, no greeting. The credit card got declined at the gas station. What's going on? He had a credit card I had been an authorized payer on. Not because he was an authorized user, but because somehow, years ago, I had agreed to set up autopay for a minimum balance on a card he had opened himself and couldn't manage. I had set it and forgotten it, and it had been quietly pulling from an account I had just closed. I did not respond. My mother called Monday morning. She said the internet had gone off. I had, apparently, at some point agreed to be the billing contact for their home internet. I genuinely did not remember doing this. But there it was, a thread I had forgotten I was holding, and now it had pulled loose. I did not respond to that either. By the end of that week, I had received 11 messages from Derek, 4 from my mother, and 1 from my Aunt Linda, who said she didn't want to get in the middle of anything but just wanted to check if everything was okay, because Derek had mentioned there were some issues. Derek had mentioned, I almost laughed. What I did not anticipate was the voicemail from Derek that arrived on a Friday night. I listened to it standing on my kitchen, eating leftovers straight from the container like a person who has earned the right to do exactly that. His voice was not angry, for once. It was something I hadn't heard from him in a very long time. He sounded scared. He said the landlord had sent a notice. He said he hadn't realized how much he'd been relying on. He paused there on things evening out. He said he needed to figure out a plan and he thought maybe we could talk. Really talk. He said he was sorry if it came across the wrong way before. If it came across the wrong way. I finished my leftovers. I put the container in the sink. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the city for a while. All those lit windows going on forever. All those other lives stacked up on top of each other. And I thought about the girl who drove to Seattle in a car that almost didn't make it. And I did not call my brother back. The situation I had not planned for came 6 weeks after that at my cousin Vicky's engagement party. I had almost skipped it. But Vicky is genuinely one of my favorite people, despite the LinkedIn incident, and it was in Portland, which was close enough, and I thought, I can do this. I can go to a party and have a normal time and not make everything about my family. What I had not counted on was that Derek and my mother would also be there. I saw them before they saw me. My mother was in a yellow dress, standing near the food table, talking to Vicky's future mother-in-law. Derek was at the bar, nursing something, looking at his phone. My mother looked fine. She looked, and I say this not to be mean, but because it's the only word, comfortable. She did not look like someone who had been struggling. She looked like someone who had briefly had a disruption to her comfort. I took a breath and I stayed. I was not going to let this ruin Vicky's night. It was fine for the first hour. I kept to the other side of the room. I talked to Vicky. I met her fiancé. I ate small food off small plates and drank sparkling water because I wanted to be clear-headed for whatever was coming. What came was Derek, about 90 minutes in. He appeared at my elbow and he said, quietly, like we were co-conspirators, "Hey, can we talk for a second?" I said, "Sure." We moved to a corner near the window. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland does in autumn, all gray sky and wet leaves, and I remember looking at it while he talked because it was easier than looking at him. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he didn't want to fight. He said he understood maybe the way he laid out the plan had sounded off, but he wanted me to know it came from a real place, from genuinely worrying about the family's stability. He said our mother was stressed. He said she hadn't been sleeping well. I said, "Derek, when did you last have a job?" He looked at me. He said, "That's not." I said, "When did you last have a job?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been working on some things." "What things?" "Business development, networking." "It's for how long?" He looked away. "About 2 years. 2 years. My brother had not held a job in 2 years, and in that same 2 years he had taken $1,100 from me in various small amounts I had not added to my original count. I had done the math by then. I said, "I love you. I need you to understand that, but I'm not going to fund a life for you that you haven't built. That's not love. That's not love." "That's something else," he said. "Mom is going to be devastated." I said, "Mom is an adult." He said, "You're really going to do this? You're going to let us struggle?" And something happened in me right then, not anger, not sadness, something that felt like the last piece of a thing finally settling into place. I said, "You've been struggling your whole life, Derek. I've been paying for it and it hasn't helped you. Maybe that's the part we should have figured out a long time ago." I left the corner. I found Vicky, hugged her, told her the party was beautiful, and I meant it. I left before my mother could make her way across the room to me. I drove back to my hotel in the rain and I slept better than I had in months. The handwritten letter arrived 11 days later. It had been forwarded through Vicky, which meant Derek had asked Vicky to deliver it, which meant he had put my cousin in an awkward position, which was its own kind of telling. The envelope was addressed in my mother's handwriting. I made coffee first. I sat down at my kitchen table in the morning light. I opened it. My mother wrote that she didn't understand what had happened to our family. She wrote that she had done her best and she knew it wasn't always enough, but she had loved us both the same. She wrote that Derek was lost and she didn't know how to help him and she'd been counting on. She crossed something out there, I could see the mark. She had hoped that things would be different now. She wrote that she missed me. She wrote that she missed me. She wrote, please. I read it twice. I set it down. I looked out the window at the gray November sky. I had waited my whole life for that letter. Not the one asking for money. The one underneath it. The one that said, I see you. I know it wasn't fair. I'm sorry for what I asked you to carry. That letter was buried in there somewhere, under the crossed-out words and the careful sentences, and if I looked at it the right way, I could almost find it. Almost. I wrote back. 1 page, my own handwriting, which is better than hers. I told her I loved her. I told her I would always love her. I told her that I couldn't keep being the answer to every problem, that I had spent so long managing their lives that I had barely started living mine, and that if things were going to be different between us, they would have to be different in the real way, not just in the amounts and the account numbers, but in what we expected from each other. I told her I was not going to fund Derek's life any longer. That if she wanted to help him, she was going to have to find her own way to do that. That I would not be the intermediary, the buffer, the safety net strung between the two of them and held up by my own exhaustion. I told her I was still her daughter. I told her she could call me. I told her the call would have to be about us, about her, about who we actually were to each other, not about accounts or plans or what the family needed. Then I sealed it and I mailed it and I went for a long walk along the waterfront in the kind of cold November air that makes you feel absolutely, undeniably alive. I don't know exactly what happened after that, and I mean that literally. I stopped tracking it. I know for Vicky that Derek eventually got some kind of contract work through a friend of a friend. I know my mother called me in December, and that it was the first time in as long as I could remember that she talked to me for 20 minutes without once mentioning money. We talked about a show she had been watching. We talked about her neighbor's new dog. We talked about nothing important and everything real. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. She called again in January and February, each time a little easier, each time a little more like two people who actually knew each other. Derek texted me in March. He said he had started seeing someone, a therapist, and that he was working on some things. He said he was sorry for how he handled the conversation last year. He said he knew it didn't fix anything. I told him I appreciated him saying it and that I meant it, and that was the whole conversation, and it was exactly the right size. I am not going to tell you I fixed my family. I didn't. I'm not sure it was ever mine to fix. What I did was stop pretending that my money was the thing holding us together, because when you do that long enough, you start to believe it. And then you start to believe that you without the money are worth nothing, and that is the most expensive lie you will ever tell yourself. I sit in my apartment now, the good one, the one I got after the new job started, with the big windows and the view of the water, and I think about Dayton sometimes. The 2-bedroom apartment, the smell of cigarettes and something fried, the girl who figured out early that she was going to have to be her own answer to every question. She was right about that. She was right about all of it. What she didn't know yet was that being your own answer doesn't mean being alone. It means choosing, very carefully, who else gets to be part of your story, not by accident, not by obligation, not because you share a last name and a complicated history and a mother who crossed something out in a letter and didn't explain why. By choice. Deliberately. With open eyes. My family asked for everything I had built. In the end, I gave them something smaller and something real. I gave them a version of me that could actually show up. Not because I had to, but because on certain days, in certain phone calls, I wanted to. That is the whole story, and it is entirely, completely mine. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any cosmic sense, just the plain, mechanical way that one thing leads to another, the way a leak ignored long enough eventually takes down a ceiling. Derek didn't become who he is overnight, and I didn't become someone who could finally say no overnight either. Both of those things were built slowly, choice by choice, year by year, in a house in Dayton where the rules were never written down but everyone understood them. He was the one who needed, I was the one who provided. That was the architecture of our family. And we both lived inside it for so long that neither of us ever stopped to ask who designed it or whether it was actually holding anything up worth keeping. Here's what I've come to understand about intelligence. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you develop by paying attention. Real intelligence is the ability to look at a pattern that has never worked and stop expecting it to work differently. I kept giving. Derek kept taking. My mother kept watching and calling it love, and I kept telling myself that this time it would shift, that eventually they would see what I was doing and something in them would change. That's not hope. That's just a more exhausting version of the same mistake, repeated until you're too tired to remember you had a choice. The $47,000 I calculated that night at my kitchen table, that number didn't make me angry when I found it. It made me sad. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented, years of trying to buy my way into being valued. Years of thinking that if I just gave enough, eventually there would be enough. There isn't a number for that. There never was. What changed for me wasn't some dramatic moment. It was that Thursday morning phone call from my mother, her voice soft and practiced, and realizing I could hear the rehearsal underneath it. That's the thing about growing up and genuinely paying attention to the people who raised you. Eventually, you stop hearing just what they're saying and you start hearing the whole shape of it. The structure. The ask that was always coming, dressed in whatever language seemed most likely to work that day. Serena, you're so capable. Serena, family takes care of each other. Serena, you have so much. What nobody said. Ever. Not once, Serena. How are you doing? That's the thing about moral clarity. It doesn't usually arrive as a lightning bolt. It arrives as a quiet recognition, almost boring in how obvious it turns out to be. The people who love you want to know how you are. That's not a complicated standard. It's just true. And then there's the question of what you do with that recognition. You can know a thing and still not act on it. That's where character actually lives. Not in the knowing, but in what you do on the ordinary Tuesday morning after you know it. I closed the accounts, I changed the direct deposit, I wrote the letter, I went to Vicky's party and stood my ground in a corner by a Rain Street window and told my brother the truth without raising my voice. None of that required exceptional strength. It just required deciding, once, that my own life was worth building the same way I had built my career. Deliberately. On real foundations, with no borrowed scaffolding pretending to be something it wasn't. Derek is getting help now. My mother calls and we talk about things that have nothing to do with money. It's not a perfect ending because there aren't perfect endings, only better arrangements. What I know is that the version of me who drove out of Dayton in a car that barely made it deserved to arrive somewhere that was actually hers. She finally did.